Hello and welcome to a new lesson, Standard versus Non-Standard Language. In this lesson, we will talk about what is a standard language. Then we will talk about history of a standard language, non-standard language, a standard versus non-standard language, and examples of a standard and non-standard language. Let's discuss each one of them in detail. A standard language. What is it? For that matter, a standard language can also be termed as a standard English. It is one of the varieties of language, and it is the variety of language that is acquired through education, schooling, and training. We continue with our ideas. A standard language. It is the variety of language that is more formal, polished, prestigious, and dignified. So what we come to know is that a standard language has its own prestigious position in the society. We continue our discussion about a standard language. It is the variety of language that forms the basis of broadcasting, such as print media, in which we have books, we have newspapers and magazines, and then we have electronic media, in which we have television and radio. So we can understand that standard language is the basis of the language of broadcasting. We continue our discussion, that is to say, a standard language. This is the variety of language we normally try to teach to those who want to learn English as a second language. And this is the variety of language in which English is largely associated with a written system of language such as vocabulary, spelling, and grammar. We continue our discussion, that is to say, a standard language. So, if we argue a standard language as one of the varieties of language being used in broadcasting in the United States, in this way we can say a standard American English. If the standard language or a standard English is used in Britain, we can say a standard British English. If the standard English is used in Australia, we can also say that a standard Australian English. Likewise, if it is used in Canada, we can say a standard Canadian English, and so on. Continue our discussion, that is to say, historical background of a standard English. Historical background of a standard English. It arose largely out of a series of countless historical developments, such as certain words, forms of language, usages of language happened to be accepted by educated people in position of prestige and respect in the society. A standard language, the single most important factor behind a standard language was the political, economic, and cultural influence of the educated class of people in London. And that became the basis of a standard language or a standard English. What is non-standard language? Non-standard language. The name itself suggests not standard, that is to say, not up to the mark, not up to the level, not up to the height of appreciation. That is to say, it does not conform to a class of refinement in pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. So what we come to know is that non-standard language is not up to the mark. There is no so much of hard and fast rule in following any type of system. You have, in other words, a bit more freedom to use grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation in the way you want to use. That is the idea here. We continue our discussion. Non-standard language. It is one of the varieties of language. That's very much clear. Like a standard language, non-standard language is being used, is being spoken by people at a certain place, in a certain locality. Therefore, we can term it as one of the varieties of language. We continue our discussion. Non-standard language. It is the variety of language that is less formal, less polished, and less prestigious, and to add, it is more localized rather than it has global appeal or international influence, and so on. We continue our discussion with different ideas about non-standard language. That is one of the reasons why it cannot be acquired through education, through schooling, and through training. So, non-standard language, since it does not follow any system of pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary, therefore it cannot be introduced at the level of education, at the level of schooling or training at any stage. We continue with some more ideas about non-standard language. It is the language that has not benefited from the institutional support. So non-standard language is largely ignored and does not have any kind of support. That is to say, has not received major funding from the government and has not appealed to the educated class of people, to the civilized class of people, to the rich class of people. The people who use a standard language normally come from the higher class of society, educated class of society, those who have been to Oxford University, Cambridge University, and in the big universities where the language is systematized and that language is known as the standard form of language. But non-standard form of language is normally has no such appeal. We continue with our ideas, that is about non-standard language. That is why this is not, that is to say, non-standard language is not the language of print media and electronic media. That is one of the reasons why non-standard language is not the language of broadcasting, whether it is print media or electronic media. When I say print media, it includes books, newspapers and magazines. When I say electronic media, it definitely includes television and radio. Difference with examples, or difference between standard English and non-standard English with examples. Let's talk about this. What is the difference between the two? Standard English and non-standard English. Standard English, its language is normally formal, as in this example, good morning, how are you? While non-standard English, its language is informal. The same you can say like, hey, all right. We continue our discussion. Standard English and non-standard English. This one is polite style or tone, as in the example, could you close the door please? And in a non-standard English way, close the door. So its tone is a bit unfriendly. We continue our discussion about standard English and non-standard English. Basically, standard English follows a standard rule of grammar, like I wish I were a boat. Every component of grammar is followed in the standard English, while we notice variations in the use of grammar in non-standard English. Like sometimes you just don't care about the grammatical pattern or the rule. Like in this example, I wish I was a bird. Instead of were, here it is was. And I think that is not the right way of using language. We continue our ideas with the standard English and non-standard English. Standard English follows correct spelling pattern. Of course, like tonight is a correct spelling, but non-standard English, incorrect spelling. They just don't care. It's okay. So long as you can understand it, you can communicate, that's okay, without caring about the spelling. As you can notice in this example, tonight, so there is a spelling mistake. We continue with the same idea about standard English and non-standard English. Fewer contracted words are found in standard English, like you are, you would. But in non-standard English, most of the time we use lots of contracted words, like you are, we would, I'll, his, she's, and so on. We continue our ideas, standard English and non-standard English. No slang. In standard English, there is no scope for using slang. So we just have the full expression like going to. But in non-standard English, we have lots of slang. Gonna. That's all we have. Thank you.